Are you familiar with the concept of to barter? Are you familiar with that idea? The idea is that instead of cash, you trade things that are of value. For instance, you have a country ham, and I have a rick of split firewood. And so we might make an agreement to trade those things. I get your ham, you get my firewood. But we have to kind of compensate for circumstances. For instance, on a cold morning like this morning, I'm thinking that my rick of split firewood is worth more than just your ham. And so you may have to throw in a couple dozen eggs with the country ham in order to get my rick of firewood. You get the idea. It's a barter system. You try to exchange things that are of equal value. That is the notion. It's an old system, and it's been around forever. In the past, that's primarily the way things were done. Some people are saying that in really bad economic times that could even arise in our future, paper money would become valueless, and we would revert potentially to a system of bartering, trading things of equal wealth. If that happened, I think it would require a lot of hard choices. I want to make sure that if I'm my side of the proposition, I want to make sure that I'm making a fair trade. Am I giving too much for something that's not as valuable, and so forth? And so trying to get things to equate. In other words, get the balance scale to level out. What I'm giving, I'm getting back something that is, reasonably equal in value. All right, barter, to trade things of value. Jesus suggested that some people, in fact, I think probably lots of people, are bartering their souls, and Jesus asked this very important question. He said, "For what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" We want to evaluate that question and think about what the concept that Jesus suggested there. In a barter system, you want to trade things of value, equal value. What would you have that would equal the value of your soul? That's the question. And we're going to investigate that for just a few minutes this morning. We stop here to say thank you for being here. As I mentioned just a minute ago, it's pretty chilly springtime morning in Middle Tennessee. The winter has reappeared for us for a couple of days, but they promise us that in a few days it will be much better, and we hope that that is true. But we thank you for being here this morning, and for those who are visiting with us, we're particularly grateful that you have come our way, and we want you to come back just every time you have a chance. Thanks for being here and for the encouragement that you provide by being here this morning. Okay, so what would you be willing to trade for your soul? Well, the first thing that we might suggest is money and material wealth. I believe that this is probably the most obvious thing that comes to mind, and might be the first thing you think of when you think about what people give in exchange for their souls. All through time, men have been strongly motivated by the prospect of getting money, one way or another, fairly or unfairly, to get money. I suppose that's the reason why we have banks on nearly every street corner, because men have decided the best thing to do is put your money in a bank and lock it up so that people can't come and take it from you, because men are motivated to do that sort of thing. We even have bank robbers, of course, who try to go to the bank and get the money that you have in the bank and get it out of there. And so men obviously have, through the ages, been strongly motivated about money and material wealth. But unfortunately, they are too often willing to trade their souls for such. But the value of money in the face of God's judgment is worthless. Proverbs 11 verse 4 says, "Riches do not profit in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death." So when it comes to the day of God's wrath, in the face of God's eternal judgment, riches do not profit at all. You're not going to be able to buy your way to heaven. Having lots of money is not going to be the thing that makes you safe for eternity. Paul told the proper way to view material wealth in a well-known passage here in 1 Timothy 6, beginning verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. Stop there for a minute. We cannot take anything out of the world. You remember the old story about the fella, very rich guy in a local community, and he died. And two fellows were talking about the death of this rich man that everybody knew so well. And one guy said to the other, "How much did he leave behind?" And the other one responded, "He left it all behind." And that, of course, is exactly true. We're going to leave it all behind. We cannot take anything out of this world, Paul says. He goes on, "But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs." Notice the problem that Jesus is here describing, a wrong attitude toward money, that's not just for rich people who have to worry about having a wrong attitude toward money. It's those who desire to be rich. Well, a guy who doesn't have a penny to his name can have this inordinate desire for riches, right? It's the love of money that's the root of all kinds of evil. Well, you can love money even if you don't have any, and it can lead you into all kinds of error and mistakes and sins. And so we should not excuse ourselves here by saying, "Oh yeah, well, that's talking to really rich people, and I'm not a really rich person, and therefore the teaching of that passage doesn't particularly apply to me." It does. It, of course, does. And we need to be on guard. Would you trade your soul for money? Notice 2 Corinthians 4, verse 18. "Look not on the things which are seen, but on the things that are unseen. For the things that are seen are transient, but the things that are unseen are eternal." That's the issue, right? Are we smart enough? Are we wise enough to be able to discern between things that are just transient and temporary and will not last, you can't take it with you, versus eternal things that will be forevermore in heaven in the presence of God? Are we smart enough to make that determination? Or are we foolish enough to trade our souls for money and material wealth? Certainly, that comes to mind when Jesus asked the question, "What shall a man give in exchange for his soul?" But let me suggest to you there's some other things. This one's sort of closely associated to the previous point. Would you exchange your soul for your job or your career? Now, when we bring up this point, we have to acknowledge, of course, yes, we work and we work for money. And we're actually instructed in the Bible to provide for our own. It's a necessary thing. And so we understand that. And anything we say here has that as an obvious caveat. But the problem is that there's this added component to seeking money and material wealth, and that is just the idea of advancement in your career. You want to move up the career ladder. You want to have higher rank, maybe an official position within the company. You want to be regarded as a success in life, and very often the people of this world rate success in life with your status on your job. How high a rank do you have career-wise? Would you trade your soul for career success? And I got to say again that many people are doing that. Think about Solomon. Solomon was an extremely rich individual. As we've often pointed out, he was potentially the richest person who ever lived in the history of humanity. But he also was a highly successful person, and he had achieved amazing things, not just the accumulation of wealth, but just his building projects and the glory of Israel and Jerusalem when he was king. It was well known. The Queen of Sheba traveled 1,000 miles or more to come and see Solomon because she had heard of his fame. Notice what he said about that, though. "My heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do. And behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit. There was no profit under the sun." What? Wait a minute here, Solomon. He says, I looked on all the works my hands had wrought, all the labor that I'd labored to do. Well, why aren't you happy about that, Solomon? Why aren't you satisfied? Man, you have achieved it. You have succeeded. You are famously well known all over the world. And he says it's vanity and vexation of spirit. No profit. Why? Well, he goes on to explain that. He says, I hated all my labor which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool? Yet shall he have rule over all my labor, wherein I have labored, and wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun. This also was vanity. What was really plaguing Solomon was the realization that he had worked hard, and he was surely, in the eyes of men, a great success. But he knew he was going to die and leave it all behind, and it wouldn't matter what he had done, the labors that he had labored to do. The fact of the matter is he knew he would leave it to somebody else, and he didn't even know if the person he would leave it to would have any good common sense at all in managing the things that he had achieved. And so here's Solomon, a really successful person, not just rich, but also extremely successful. And he was plagued by the reality that he's going to leave it all behind, and it didn't really matter. It was vanity and vexation. We need to see it the same way. Would you trade your soul for your job or your career? I'm sad to say a lot of people are doing that. Would you trade your soul for your ego? I may have to explain what I mean here. So when I speak of your ego, you can imagine this guy who says, listen, I'm my own man. No one's going to tell me what to do. I'll do as I please. Now, I think all of us had occasion to know people like that. But that kind of thinking is a recipe for disaster when it comes to matters of religion, spirituality, and your eternal soul. Way too many people, when it comes to religion, are that way. You're not going to tell me what to do. I'm going to do as I please. I know what I know, and you're not going to tell me differently. That is surely, as we said, a recipe for disaster. So in order to maintain your ego and your pride and have it your own way, would you trade your soul for that? Let me take you back to the famous story of Naaman the leper in 2 Kings chapter 5, beginning verse 9. Naaman, of course, was a high-ranking military official in Syria, but he was a leper. And he came to Israel because he had heard that a prophet of God there named Elisha could heal him. And so Naaman came with his horses, with his chariot, and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger unto him, saying, Go and wash in Jordan 7 times, and thy flesh shall come again to thee, and thou shalt be clean. But Naaman was wroth, and went his way, and said, Behold, I thought, he will surely come out to me, and stand, and call on the name of the Lord his God, and strike his hand over the place, and recover the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in rage. Well, we've always pointed out this expression right here on the part of Naaman. He had his mind made up of how this should all take place. Behold, here's what I thought. He's going to come out, and he's going to come out to me and stand before me and call on the name of his Lord, strike his hand over the place, and recover. He had this all in his mind, how it ought to be, what he thought would transpire. And the fact of the matter is, Elisha didn't even come out in person. He sent his messenger out there. There's no respect for me. I'm a great general in Syria. Why wouldn't this man pay attention to me? Why wouldn't he give me the due respect I think I'm owed? And why wouldn't he do things the way I think he should do them? And he was mad about it. He was wroth. He went away. Behold, I thought, he said. Well, I want to tell you, a lot of people do that same thing religiously. In his case, he placed his pride and his preconceived notions above doing what he was instructed to do. And that was even at the cost of forfeiting this huge blessing of being healed of his leprosy. I will tell you, people are doing the same thing today. They've got their mind made up as to how things ought to be, what they think it should be, and they're not going to surrender that. They're too proud to say, well, wait a minute, maybe that's right. Maybe I've been wrong. Maybe I should change. Jeremiah 10:23 says, Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. We've got to rely on what God tells us, not on what we think, what our own pride dictates to us. Proverbs 14:12, there's a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Notice, something can seem right and still be the way of death. We've got to be aware of that, and we should never let our own pride or our own ego get in the way of us acknowledging what the Scriptures actually tell us to do. Would you trade your soul for your worldly friends? I want to here especially note that we're talking about worldly friends. Would you trade your soul for worldly friends? I hope it's well understood by all of us that good, righteous people are a blessing in our lives. Would you agree with me on that? That to be around good people, to be in the company of faithful Christians, to associate with people of like precious faith, that's a great blessing. That's a strength to us. I think a lot of us would say, it'd be next to impossible to make it if I didn't have a body of believers to associate with, people that I love and cherish as brothers and sisters in Christ. That is so important to me. And so, it's understood. We believe that. We accept that. We acknowledge that as being so. We're not talking about those kind of relationships. We're talking about worldly friends. And unfortunately, sometimes Christians allow their worldly friends to drag them down. Evil people and friendships with, close relationships with evil people have always been a threat to God's people. And it's always been a threat to being faithful to Him. So, here's a situation. You call yourself a child of God. You want the rewards of being a child of God, but you've got this group of worldly friends who engage in all sorts of sinful behavior, and they are always dragging you down, trying to get you engaged in that same kind of evil behavior. So are you willing to trade your soul in order to maintain friendships with worldly friends? 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33 says simply, be not deceived, bad company corrupts good morals. That has always been the truth. Paul said that here 2,000 years ago by inspiration, and it's still true today. Bad company corrupts good morals. In the book of Proverbs, several passages in the book of Proverbs are written like a father giving advice to his sons. And actually, in chapter 1, very early on, that kind of a context develops, and the father is giving advice to his son. Intended, of course, as advice to all, including us. Proverbs chapter 1, beginning verse 10, my son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. If they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. We shall find all precious goods. We shall fill our houses with plunder. Throw in your lot among us. My son, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths, for their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shed blood. Well, it's not too difficult to understand the kind of scenario that the wise man is presenting there. But maybe someone reading that says, well, yeah, but my friends are not suggesting that I join with them in robbery and murder. I've got some friends of this world, but they're not murderers and they're not robbers. That doesn't apply to me. Well, what about something else? What if we substituted into that text, instead of lie with us and wait for blood, ambush the innocent? What if your friends are saying, come with us, throw in with us, join with us. We're going to go out and get drunk tonight. We're going to go out and drink alcohol. We're going to go out and smoke marijuana. Would that fit the scenario? It would, wouldn't it? What about other things? What about gambling? Or what about viewing pornography or terrible movies? What about dancing? What about immodest dress? Your friends are saying, come with us and join with us in these things. The wise man says, do not walk in the way with them. Hold back your foot from their paths. That is absolutely necessary instruction for us. If they are tempting you to conform in any such area as we just mentioned, you're making a bad trade-off if you're willing to trade your soul in order to maintain your worldly friendships. And that needs to be known, and we all have to acknowledge that as being so. Here's a more specific area. Would you trade your soul for an unscriptural marriage? This is, as we said, more specific, but this is a big and growing problem. As divorce becomes so much more common in our day and time, many people are remarrying without the authority found in the Word of God. And when they get into an unscriptural marriage relationship, many are absolutely unwilling to consider leaving such a marriage in order to be right with God. Would you trade your soul in order to be able to remain in an unscriptural marriage? Jesus' teaching on marriage, divorce, and remarriage is not hard to understand. A lot of people have tried to twist it and contrive it and make all kinds of arguments to the contrary of what is obviously stated here. Matthew 19, verse 9, Jesus said, "Whosoever shall put away his wife, except it be for fornication, and shall marry another, committeth adultery. And whoso marrieth her, which is put away, doth commit adultery." Again, I think that's simple enough to understand. But perhaps there's no teaching of Jesus in the New Testament more twisted and perverted and argued in order to justify some sort of a marriage relationship. This is plain. Are you willing to trade your soul in order to stay in a marriage that's condemned by Jesus' plain teaching on marriage, divorce, and remarriage? We just recently studied the book of Ezra, and in chapter 10 of Ezra, back in those Old Testament times, there was a situation where people had married wives that they shouldn't be married to, not authorized, sinful. And in Ezra 10, beginning verse 1, a very great assembly of men, women, and children gathered to Ezra out of Israel, for the people wept bitterly. "We have broken faith with our God, have married foreign women from the peoples of the land. But even now there is hope for Israel in spite of this. Therefore let us make a covenant with our God to put away all these wives." These had married foreign women, and some of the women had even borne children. As we were studying this recently, and also have in times past, it's interesting to note that this was what was required of them to be right with God. They had wives that they were not authorized to have. And in order to be right with God, they had to sever those relationships. Whenever we suggest that in our day and time, we get a common reaction is God would never require such a thing. God would never make someone give up a wife, and maybe even a wife and children, in order to be right. God would never do that. Really? He would never do that? Well, here's exactly a historical instance where He did do that. He did that exact thing. These men were married to women that they were not authorized to be married to. To be right, they had to sever those relationships, even relationships that had produced children. Yeah, sometimes it's necessary. Would you trade your soul in order to be able to stay in an unscriptural marriage? Would you trade your soul? Would you trade your soul to be accepted by the majority? You know, I think it's just a very common human trait is that we want to fit in with the people around us. We don't want to be different. We don't want to be viewed as being different. But the fact of the matter is, we have to be different because the majority of people are facing God's eternal judgment. We have to be willing to be different. But if you are willing, then there'll be a temptation to trade your soul in order to stay with the majority, to be accepted in the majority. In Exodus 23, verse 2, Moses warned the Israelites, "Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil." Get the idea. What's the multitude primarily doing? The multitude is primarily doing evil. Don't follow them in the doing of evil. Jesus famously said it this way, Matthew 7, verse 13, beginning, "Enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few." What about the many? The many are on the way that leads to destruction. What about the few? The few are on the way that leads to life. And so, You can't stay in the majority, right? The majority is going the wrong way and will end up in the wrong place. Are you willing to trade your soul to be accepted by the majority? Jesus here asks, what is a man profited if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Now, we often refer to that as a rhetorical question because it's a question whose answer is so obvious that you don't even have to state it, right? What would it profit you if you could gain the whole world? Now, nobody's ever achieved that. I mean, even the wealthiest people, even we talked about Solomon, very rich in the past, but he didn't have all the world's wealth. We could talk about some of the rich people in our world today. Elon Musk, I think I just read recently where he's once again regained #1 status, richest man in the world. That's probably because Clayton bought a car from him here recently and it got him back up over the limit. What about Elon Musk or Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or one of those guys? What if you had their wealth? Would you trade your soul in order to have what they have? Jesus didn't have to answer that question. The question's too obvious. You'd be making a bad trade. Remember what we said earlier? In a barter type relationship, you want the balance scales to come out pretty even, right? You want to make sure that what you're getting for what you're giving is worth it. That's the way bartering works, right? There's nothing here that's going to balance this scale when it comes to your soul. There's no balance. Nothing. All the wealth of the world, if you gained all the wealth of the world, but had to give your soul in exchange, you'd be making a bad trade. What shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Well, there's lots of things. Money's one of them, but as we suggested here this morning, there are other things that could be given in exchange for your soul. All of it is a bad trade. If it costs you your soul, you've made a bad trade. What's your situation this morning? Are you faithfully serving God? Are you a child of God? Have you obeyed the simple gospel plan of salvation? Hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized for the remission of sins. If you've not done that, if you understand it, we encourage you to make that decision. If you need more study, say so. We'll study with you. If you're a Christian already, but you've been kind of trading off things and maybe haven't been maintaining your clear notion of the value of your soul, if there's any way we can help you, let us know while we stand and sing this song.